Hey everybody, this is Frank from Frank's Exotics with my first long form build. This build's going to be a 12x12x12 Exo Terra, pretty awkward size. I've been struggling trying to find something useful for it, so what I ended up going for was a little bit of a morphing build. If you're not familiar with what a morphing build is, pretty much what I'm trying to do right now is make it a little bit easier for the tadpole rearing process. So I know some people struggle, but this seems to be a pretty easy way to accomplish that. What I'm gonna end up doing later on in this video is cutting some filter foam at a slanted angle so that it can be a little bit easier for the tadpole rearing process. If you see right now, I already gave the tank a good wipe down, and the next step that I'm doing is I'm just taping off what I don't want the foam to adhere to. I find this to be a little bit easier than not taping it and then having to clean up, just as probably the least favorite part of mine is the cleanup process after doing one of these builds. Here I am just mocking up how I think the tank will look best, and what I'm using right here is just foam. I believe it is a 1/2 inch. You're gonna see me start struggling a little bit with this foam, being a total goofball and knocking off a little bit that's in my hand. It's just part of the process of working with some of the stuff. You just have funny moments like that. I decided to keep it in here just as a break of humor. I ended up putting this part in 2x speed just because it did take me a little bit longer to figure out exactly how I wanted it, because it's going to be the more permanent part of the build. Once I was satisfied with how the scape was turning out, I went ahead and siliconed the pieces all together, just putting a little bit on the back of each piece, then stacking it. I'm going to go back and add some more silicone, just because I wanted it to actually adhere and not have any background failures later on in the future. This process did take a little bit longer than I'd like to admit, just siliconing everything together and making sure I was happy with how it turned out. Well, this would be a great time to add some of that good old elevator music. On this part of the build process, you'll see me slowly start siliconing the back as well. What that's going to do is it's going to act like an anchor point, so the silicone has something a little bit more stable to adhere to. This part's a little bit later on that same day. The silicone got a little bit tacky, and looking back at it, I was just realizing that if I left the foam blocks like this, I would then have to use my background to kind of scape towards the side as well, and I really didn't want to take up that much room in an already small tank. This part of the build is going to be me prepping for the gray stuff expanding foam. Right now what I'm doing is taping off the top as well, because again, the cleanup process. And then the next step that I like to do is I like to apply the great stuff expanding foam from the top, which you'll see in the next clip here. And here we are starting the foaming process. What I'm doing right here is I'm starting from the top
It just works a little bit easier like that for me, and I find it to work the best. I like to get in all the little nooks and crannies, that way the foam has something a little bit more solid to adhere to. I ended up flipping the tank as well, just to make it a little bit easier to get all the way to the bottom of that structure, and just so I was trying to finish the rest of this can. This is that next day after it's been fully cured. This process did take me a little bit longer. I was just taking the build slow. But this is me starting the carving process. The key is to not be scared of that you're going to carve too much away, and just to go at it, and hopefully you end up with a beautiful finished product. You'd be surprised. There was a couple times in this build and I was like, what the heck am I doing? And then by the end of it, I was pretty content with how it came out. I ended up skipping a lot of the carving process just because there's no reason for anybody to have to sit through 30 minutes of me struggling to carve this foam. What I started doing now is mixing the DryLoc. It's a pretty good product. I like to use it. It pretty much dries like rock hard, and I just mix it with the quick-crete pigments. Right here you see the example of the color that I'm going for. I basically just mix it all until I have no kind of white spots in it. What I'm using to apply the DryLoc in this scene is just your regular foam brush. I had a plethora of them laying around, so I just thought might as well make some use out of them. This is after that first coat. Again, I didn't think painting this on was something that you had to go in detail around. Right now I'm just getting the finishing touches, the small little areas up on top. I did end up taking that tape off, which I later regretted because I had to clean the excess that was on top of there. So this is me that next day with the second coat. I ended up wanting a little bit of a lighter color, so I ended up just going a little bit lighter. It dries darker, so there was no like drastic change. This, whenever it is fully cured for those two coats, I also did apply another one off camera. But right now what I'm gonna start doing is just doing the highlights. This is whenever that build really starts to come together. The goal of doing these highlights is basically to get all the high points to a lighter color, leaving the low points at a darker color. This creates kind of a shadow effect and gives your build a little bit more depth. You'll see what I'm talking about here shortly whenever I actually start making a little bit more progress on the touch-up paint. So what you end up using to do this touch-up, or highlights if you will, is you just mix the same DryLoc with a little bit of a lighter color. You could choose whatever color you want. I wanted more of a clay realistic background, kind of, I guess, mimicking Australia in a way, which is kind of weird with the build that I'm doing, but I just really like that pattern. I've done it on a few other of my builds, and I just like how it ages and how it turns out overall. You don't have to really get too technical whenever you're doing this. If you see me, it kind of just looks like I'm smearing paint all over the place. But that is the next day when it's fully cured, me starting the cleanup process. What I'm using is just a razor blade. and I'm just scraping up all that excess DryLoc on the sides. You'll see me go around and do this. About midway through the process, I just decided to rinse it off and see how the finished product was going to look, kind of like a sneak peek, if you will. Then I realized that I didn't quite like how much of the DryLoc was showing on the side, so I ended up going back. I basically just went back just to clean it up a little bit, give it a nicer appearance. I think overall, going back and scraping a little bit more did make it look a lot neater. This clip right here is going to show the foam already in. It's just filter foam that's cut down. If you want an in-depth tutorial on that, please comment down below and I'll be sure to actually make one. Right now I'm going to be using a mixture of leaves, which I later regret putting the leaves in this early into the build. I was just pretty excited about finally getting it done. The big leaves on screen, they're going to be the magnolia leaves, but I'm also going to be adding some live oak as well. And that is just magnolia bark that's been cleaned and sanitized. I like adding it, it gives a little bit more texture. So this is me going ahead and starting the planting process. What I'm doing here is I'm just cutting the filter foam and I'll end up sticking the root system down below. You see me fighting with these leaves, taking a few out just because I put them in way too early. But looking back, I would not have put the leaves in until after I was done. This is me planting some more. I ended up crushing the leaves a little bit just because they're just a little too big for this enclosure. If you're curious about any of these plants' names, please comment down below and I'll be sure to get back to you. As the top of my head, I can't remember what most of these are. They're all just various cuttings either from my propagation bins or from other builds I've done in the past. I ended up adding a variety of plants trying to see what would do best in here. I added a good mix of vining plants, trelling plants, and this one right here is going to be, I believe, a fern species of some sort. Correct me if I'm wrong. I just really like having it. I only have, I believe, one of these plants, but they just do really well in the humid environments and they get pretty big and luscious, so I like adding them whenever I do have a cutting. So I was already done planting it. I like planting my vivariums like a little bit on the scarce side, just trying to see what actually takes, what doesn't take. And I just kind of like letting the plants do their thing. I don't like overfilling them and overstuffing them to where they look like a fully grown out enclosure day one. I believe that just leads to a very cramped enclosure and a lot of plant species just dying because they're fighting for resources or fighting for light. I ended up going back and adding a little bit of moss that I had from one of my prop bins, trying to see if it'll do good in this enclosure. It is a high humidity enclosure, so I believe it'll do fine. So what I like to do on fresh enclosures is I'll end up saran wrapping the top just to kind of keep the humidity as high as I can, especially on enclosures that I know I'm not going to put the time and effort into making a custom top. Admittedly, I did spend way too long trying to get the saran wrap perfect, knowing as soon as it got a little bit of water on it that it'll start sagging. The next clip in this build, I'm going to start spraying down. I like to give it a healthy misting once all the plants are settled in, just to kind of bump up the humidity, make sure everything's going to acclimate correctly, because these plants are used to 100% humidity from my grow bins. So this is the finished product. I was pretty happy with how it turned out, all things considered. It was a fairly impromptu budget build. So this is Frank's Exotic signing out for now. I'll try to upload a little bit more consistently, just based on my schedule. If you like the content, please subscribe, and I'll be trying to post a video about every week, week and a half. At least something short, maybe even some shorts every now and again.